Hello and welcome to a TDR webinar. I'm very glad to have with me two young scholars from Iran, Milad Azarm and Reza Kouchek-zadeh. They've written an article called Investigating Early Dramaturgy and Theater Directing in the shabih'khani of the Qajar era in Iran. And the abstract of this article reads, scholarly research on shabih'khani, the Iranian traditional performance generally known as tazieh, has frequently portrayed creators of this theatrical form as religious devotees with little or no theatrical knowledge and expertise. Yet newly discovered manuscripts from the Qajar era, that is 1789 to 1925, in the Western calendar, or 1168 to 1304 in the Iranian calendar. It contains annotations and stage directions that can be interpreted as directorial notes and dramaturgical enhancements. In other words, that modern directing, as we know it globally, emerged in Iran at a slightly before, but certainly at the same time generally as it emerged in Europe. So we're going to have a discussion about that. But before we launch into that, I'd like Milad and Azarm to introduce themselves.
Great. First, it's my honor to share my thoughts here and to talk with you, dear Professor Schechner. My name is Milad Azarm. I'm from Iran. I taught theater in Iran, but at the moment, I'm a first PhD student in interdisciplinary art at OU University. At the moment, I'm here in the US. And my research mostly focuses on relationship between theater and philosophy. And sometimes I try to find relationship between these terms in Iranian traditional performances. Reza is a scholar, theater scholar. He got his master in Iran, and his scholar work mostly focuses on Iranian traditional performances. He taught theater at several universities in Iran and private institutes as well. And he is the author and director, theater director in Iran as well. At the moment, he lives in Iran.
Thank you. So let's go right into the main thesis of your paper. So if you would outline what you're saying you discovered, and very importantly, how you discovered it. In other words, how you got into these archives and found this data, and tell us in a certain step-by-step way how you moved, how you found out, how you decided to make this investigation, and what you found.
Oh, yeah. So let me start with a short story about how this article was formed. Actually, Reza was invited to the Library of Iranian Parliament in 2006 for editing a book. During his invitation, he found several manuscripts which seemed to be quite unique. So he called me, and then we figure out these manuscripts are from TDR, which was the royal hall during Qajar era. The results of these investigations can be seen in 3 books and several articles in Farsi, and the one you're going to publish. Generally speaking, we found some unique annotations, some unique manuscripts, which previously have not been accessible to scholars. Previous study mostly rely on Orientalists and Iranians' observations and memories. We rely instead on newly discovered verified historical documents. These discovered texts, including record of performance, manuscripts, annotations, and stage directions, center on the work of two famous directors on that time, Mirza Muhammad Taqi Taziyegardan. Unfortunately, we don't know when he was born, but we know he was passed away in 1872. And another director was Muhammad Baqir Moinul Buka. Again, we know the time of his death. He passed away in 1914. So, but let me first start with two phrases, two terms, which we use mostly interchangeably. The first is shabih'khani. Shabih'khani, also widely known as taziyeh. The second one is taziyeh. Shabih'khani is a popular indigenous Iranian theatrical form. But shabih'khani is completely different from taziyeh. Shabih'khani is comprised of two words. The first is shabih, which means mimesis or imitation. Second one is khani, which means reading or chanting. However, the term taziyeh derives from the Arabic root azza and can be translated as consolation, mourning. But you know, we can consider shabih'khani as an umbrella term for all forms, including women shabih'khani or comedic. So it's quite clear that taziyeh is just dedicated to mourning, to consolation, to events of Karbala. But we cannot consider this term for example, comedic shabih'khani. So this is the general differences between these two terms. To talk about mimesis, acting as holy characters and myths becomes advantageous for actors, but pretending to be those characters is sinful. So actors imitate the Hussein's behavior, holy characters' behaviors, but they pretend. This separation is necessary to protect performance from religious conservatives who may accuse the actors of engaging in idolatry by portraying human figures. So let's talk about the general or main story of the shabih'khani. Previously, most scholars believe that the main story is just events of Karbala occurred in current-day Iraq in 618. But we can find...
I think you need, for our audience, you need to briefly say what the events of Karbala was, the martyrdom of Hussein, etc. That story, I think some of the viewers may not know the story itself.
Yeah, exactly. So the event is the combat between two groups of people. The first group is considered as the followers of Imam Hussein, the third Shia's Imam. The second group is somehow enemy of the Imam Hussein. So it seems that you know, it's a combination of myths and historical records. We cannot distinguish these myths and historical record from each other. So it seems that the enemy were more than 3,000 people, while the Hussein's his followers were only 72%. So it's unfair battle. And during this battle, Hussein and his follower were killed. So each year, she start mourning for this matter, so to commemorate that event. Do you have any?
No, let me clarify a little bit for some of our listeners and viewers. So this event, which happened a long time ago, 650 something in the Western 618 in the Western calendar, was the founding event of the division in Islam between Shia and Sunni.
Yeah.
Yes, and Sunni. And at this battle of Karbala, the followers of Hussein, who is the recognized founder of Shia, were killed, captured, martyred by forces led by a man named Yazid, who was the leader of the other side. And this division in Islam continues to this day. And among followers of Shia particularly, each year the taziyeh or the mourning plays are performed, and there's a series of these plays, not just one. They tell different aspects of this story in many ways. So that's what the taziyeh is. Now, it has been thought of up to this point, up until Milad and Reza's, I think, brilliant and ground-shaking research, to be, a religious observance for the most part in the form of a drama. There's been quite a bit published about it in the West. I would like you to describe the theaters in Tehran, or at that time, the tekals, which were great indoor theaters used, because this taziyeh processions are very often outdoors, and the performances are done outdoors and so on. But the performances you're describing, some of them at least, were performed in large theaters that very much resemble theaters in the West as well, in terms of their organization of space and so on, because it's within these theaters, the tekals, that the directors, the shabih'khanis, were practicing dramaturgy and directing in Iran in the 19th century. So describe a little bit the theater, and then describe the work of the directors and the dramaturgs in that theater.
Yeah. First, let me talk about its evolutionary process.
Yes.
The first recorded public mourning ceremonies for Hussein took place in current-day Iraq, again in 963. The report shows it's not a theatrical form; it's actually a processional performance.
Processional. Yes.
Processional performance,
right.
Yes. But the oldest known document reporting a full instead of a dialogue processional shabih, found in Germany book in 1739. So we can find many theatrical elements, greater number of theatrical elements than the previous in this report. During 66 year gap in records, we must assume that shabih evolved from early dialogless processions to fully theatrical realized shabih'khani. And a full theatrical shabih'khani performance took place on Khark Island in Persian Gulf in 1765. So we can find an evolutionary process in this theatrical form. However, during the Qajar, we can see the flourishing and developing of this theatrical form under the rule of Qajar royalties. So before that time, as you said, most of shabih'khani performed outdoor, but during that time, we had many tekias or theater halls, which were so common during that time. But the most famous one is Royal Tekke or Tekke Dolat. However, it seems that, for example, most scholars believe that these tekke were constructed by the order of the king of that time, Nasreddin Shah, when he traveled to another country and visit the European countries and halls. But these manuscripts shows that we perform in Tekke Dolat or royal theater before that time, before the first travel of king to European countries. So we cannot say that the hall was influenced by the architecture of those countries. Regarding directing, in previous texts, we cannot see annotations and stage directions, but these newly manuscripts shows that, for example, Moinul Buka wrote lots of annotations about blocking, about stage directing, about sounds, and also we can see some draft. For example, it shows that in just one case, I see a manuscript from Moinul Buka, written by Moinul Buka. He wrote a draft, and then he, the second one, as a full play, is completely different from the draft. So he knows how to deal with his elements, with his text. Previously, most scholars believed that these directors were uneducated. They just believe in God and they just work for the God. So they don't, for example, sign their texts because they prefer to have divine merits after the death. But these manuscripts shows that Moinul Buka signed each play at the end, put his name, and also we can see that he sometimes refers to original sources, exactly the same as what modern dramaturges do.
Again, to the Tekke Dolat, how many people were in this theater?
It depends on the size of the hall. It depends on the money.
Yes, but the Dolat, the big one.
The big one, the audience would be 20,000 people. But regarding the actors, we are not sure. But based on the photos, we can see it would be more than, for example, 100 or 200 people. The actors, the props, we can also see elephants, horses. So it seems that it's a vast performance. It's an extended performance. And Moinul Buka hired the actors from different parts of Iran for 4 months, and the rehearsal took at least more than 3 months to prepare just one performance.
And did they these directors work on what we would call characterization? Did they work on acting with the actors? Did they do things that were recognizably theater in the modern sense of theater?
Yeah. For example, in a manuscript, if I remember quite properly, Muhammad Baqir writes Mokhleb. Mokhleb is a character.
Right.
Changed his turban mother answer when they want to bury Mukhleb son between two walls. Mukhleb's wife sings after Imam's verse. Followers sing Chawashi. Chawashi is a traditional melody of Iran. So written annotations such as these indicate that Moinul Buko was well aware that they wrote not literary plays but dramatic texts. In addition to dialogue, they specify actions and movements to create fully realized theatrical scenes.
Right. So, for example, I've been studying for a long time a form in India called Ram Leela, which is the story of Rama, which is performed outdoors in various stages. I won't get into details about it, except to say that the part of the performance is five young boys enacting the roles of Rama and his brothers and his wife Sita. And in the mornings, they actually rehearse with the vyasas, they're called, the directors of this performance. And they're rehearsed in terms of how they're to speak their lines and how they are to make their gestures. It's ordinary rehearsals from the Western perspective. Is there any evidence that in the shabih'khani rehearsals that the actors were coached and that they did characterizations, and that these directors actually worked with the actors on the interpretations of their roles, not simply the movements, but like what I saw in India, where they were helping them how to say the words, and what directors do.
Yeah, we cannot find such annotations in manuscript, but in memories, yes. There are lots of memories about written by Orientalists particularly, and if I could remember quite properly, written by Abdullah Mustafi, an author in Iran, about how he worked with actors, about characteristic of an actors, but we cannot find those things in manuscript, unfortunately.
Right. So what years do you put this in? 18 what? In terms of your research, what times do you think that these practices were taking place, that from the manuscripts and the research that you've done?
Yeah, we try to identify the handwritings of Mirza Muhammad Taqi Taziygardan. We don't know, as I said, when he was born, but it seems that based on the memories, it seems that he worked before 18, approximately 15.
1815.
Yeah.
Okay. And from 1815 to his death in 1860, at that point?
He actually, let me just check for a moment. He passed away in 1872.
So from 1815 to 1872, so 60 or roughly 55 years of this work. So he was a very young man when he began this work?
Actually, no. Mirza Muhammad Taqi, we don't have any pictures of him.
Right.
So we don't know when he passed away or how old he was. But regarding Mirza Muhammad Baqir, we know that we have some photos of him, and we know that he was too old.
Right. So, but the first one trained the second director. What was the relationship between the two men?
Yeah, previously we thought that they are father and son, but these manuscripts shows that the relationship would be uncle and
Nephew.
nephew. Yes.
And And so, but the uncle trained the nephew so that it's in this way.
Yeah, it was so natural during that time for example, uncles to teach their nephews or their sons, or fathers teach their sons. So it's somehow, an occupation would be somehow hierarchy.
Would the actors also be father and son? Would there be all male actors, or would there be women actresses as well, or would it be all male? And how did the line of the actors descend?
Yeah, previously all the actors perform by all characters performed by male male actors. But during that time, we can see women's shabih'khani. It seems that those performances were completely private for women. So those performances were performed by female actors.
So that you had some shabih'khani in which male actors perform both male and female roles, and other shabih'khani in which women actors perform male and female roles. And do we have any evidence that the women performing the male roles would perform the battles, and how would that happen?
Yes, for example, in the book written by Bahram Beyzai, he wrote about this. He actually attached a piece of that type of women's shabih'khani, and all women perform both male and female characters.
But these were not performed in the very large theaters. They were performed privately, or what?
Yes, exactly, privately, because it's not, because of the Islam rules, we cannot see women's and and men's in an
Together or unveiled. So by privately, privately to whom? For how many people?
Honestly speaking, at the moment we are not aware of it.
Right. That would be interesting to find out.
Hi, Mr. Richard.
So I wonder if you would comment on some of what we've been discussing. Milad will translate for us. So about your research, about what you found. I think you're the senior scholar here, so it would be very good to have your opinions about all of these things.
نظرت در مورد کار پژوهشیت و در مورد این مقاله اگر صحبتی داری.
بسیار خوب. برای من پژوهش پیدا کردن نیاکان هنریم هست.
For me, research is somehow to find my ancestors.
بسیاری از تجربه هایی که فکر میکنیم برای ما نو هستند در طول تاریخ بشر انجام شدن و نسل به نسل منتقل شدن.
We can find many new things in our previous historical process, and it seems that it has been conveying from generation to generation.
تئاتر همیشه به ریشه هاش برمیگرده.
Theater dates back to its root.
همونطوری که تئاتر اروپا نتونست تئاتر یونان رو فراموش بکنه و هنوز بهش پابنده، همونطوری که تئاتر دوره الیزابت رو نتونست فراموش بکنه، تئاتر ایرانی هم نمیتونه ریشه های سنتی و پیشتاز خودش رو فراموش بکنه.
As European theater cannot forget ancient Greek theater, and also Elizabethan theater cannot forget it. Iranian performance cannot forget its root as well.
من در پی پیدا کردن بخشی از این ریشه ها بود که دنبال پژوهش رفتم.
I was trying to find some parts of those roots. That's why I started my research.
و به گنجینه‌ای رسیدم که برای نخستین بار کشفش کردم، احیاش کردم و فهرستش رو نوشت، فهرست علمیش رو نوشتم، در اختیار گذاشتم که این گنجینه برای نخستین بار نشانه‌هایی رو با خودش داشت که هیچ کدوم از نسخه‌های پیشین شبیه‌خوانی با اون نشانه‌ها نبودن.
And I found unique collections of manuscripts which were quite new for me, and it seems that we cannot find any connections between new found manuscripts with previous ones.
برای من مثل کشف دوباره قاره آمریکا بود.
For me, it's somehow like discovering again the continent of America.
من رسیدم به نیاکانم در بخشی که فکر نمی کردم کسی بوده باشه، کسی مانده باشه، بازمانده‌ای ازشون مانده باشه.
I could achieve and see my ancestors in a place where I felt there isn't any existing material.
و ما شروع کردیم به گفتگو با هم دیگه.
And then we start to talk, we start to speak together.
و توی این گفتگو کشف شد و اون بخش ها خودشون رو بیرون ریختن و من تونستم ازش استنتاج بکنم.
During such a discussion, I can find those elements and clues, and I try to research on that to conclude some of the theatrical forms.
و شگفت زده شدم که فرمی چنین پیشرو در سده‌های پیش از زندگی ما حضور گسترده‌ای در جامعه داشته.
And I was amazed by this unique and avant-garde form because we actually talk about previous decades, previous years, previous 1,000 or hundreds years.
چیزی که منو بیشتر به شگفتی واداشت اون فردی بود، معین البکا، که انقدر فراتر از جامعه خودش تونسته بود چشم انداز جهانی رو ببینه.
I was more amazed by Moin al-Buka, who who opened horizons to extended culture above the world of that time.
توجه داشته باشید که محمد باقر معین البکا در یک جامعه کاملا سنتی زندگی میکرد.
Oh, please note that Moin al-Buka lived in a traditional and conservative society.
و توجه به این که همه این نوآوری ها و فرا رفتن از سیکل طبیعی اجرا در اون جامعه سنتی اتفاق افتاده بسیار بسیار شگفت انگیز.
And imagine that he goes above those limitations and restrictions during that time. So that was great.
نمیدونم چطوری بگم، کسی که این همه سنتی زندگی میکنه ولی این همه مدرن فکر میکنه.
I don't know how to say that. He lived traditionally, but he thought in modern sense, in a modern way.
و جهان آینده خودش رو میبینه در اجراش.
And in his performance, he could see the future of the performance world.
ما با محمد باقر معین البکا در شبیه‌خوانی ایرانی این تجربه رو کردیم که فقط به قصه های اسلام محدود نباشیم، به ادیان دیگر هم بپردازیم.
Through Muhammad Baqir's annotations and texts and plays, we could understand that we don't need to focus on just Islamic stories. In those plays, we can see plays from other sources, even other religions, even other characters. The main character, it is on my own. The main character is supposed to be the Imam Hussein, but we found eventually prophetical characters, figures became so important during Moin al-Buka's life.
امروز با یافته‌های دقیق پژوهشی میتونیم بگیم که به نظر میرسه نخستین ایده گفتگوی تمدن‌ها مال معین البکاست.
Today we can say that Moin al-Buka was the founder of the idea of dialogue among civilizations.
و تونسته از مرزهای پیشین شبیخانی عبور بکنه، به این معنا که وارد جهان تازه تری بشه.
He crossed the traditional boundaries of shabih'khani and entered to a completely new world.
Do you think that there was any direct contact between him or his period and the European directors? Because European directing began in Germany with the Duke of Saxe-Meiningen and his stage manager Kronek around the 1860 and so on. And the Germans had a very big interest in Iranian culture. And, they were the ones who were doing a lot of work in what is today's Iraq and Iran and northern India, Afghanistan, and so on. So I wonder if there was any, and they were the ones that first proposed the idea of Indo-European languages and so on. If there was any contact, either of you feel, between the German culture particularly, or modern European culture, that gave rise to directing in Europe at roughly the same time that the directing was rising in Iran?
Actually, no. It seems that, both approaches occurred at approximately at the same time, but it seems that they live in two different cosmos. So we cannot find any connection or link between the influence or impact of both on each other, and but we can find some similarities. We can find something in common in terms of directing or dramaturgy.
Yes, and it's interesting to me that it would arise at roughly the same time in these two adjoining cosmoses, as you were, civilizations. And I don't know if Iran was modernizing at all at that point, or what was going on in Iranian society. I confess my ignorance to that. But it seemed to be, from your accounts, an extremely sophisticated society, at least among a certain class of people.
Yeah, during the time we can call the start of modernization in Iran. And the start of keeping in touch with European countries. But we can see all these things during Nasruddin Shah Qajar. It means after Mirza Muhammad Taqi Taziyegardan, and
Right.
somehow at the time of Moin al-Buka. But it's so interesting. They live in two separate worlds, but they have many things in common. If other civilizations, such as, for example, directors of Beijing opera, can find clues like as we found, they have their own directions. They have their own historical materials to find whether they have directings or dramaturgies or not. Unfortunately, theater historians have paid little or no attention to the development of directing and dramaturgy outside Europe. The newly rediscovered shabih'khani manuscript from the Qajar area in Iran show that directing and dramaturgy were practiced in traditional Iranian theater starting in the late 18th century and further developed in the 19th century.
Yes, I think that's an extremely interesting point, and maybe the one that we should begin to come to a close, that there's been very little scholarly attention paid to dramaturgy and directing outside of the European sphere, when there are indications that probably if we were to look, we would find quite a bit of it. I know a little bit in Japanese theater. Usually it's the lead actors who provide the directing, the dramaturgy. Certainly in no drama, the writings of Zayami are as much about acting as they are about playwriting and so on and so forth. So that I think that your research is pointing the way forward for lots of others to look at directing and dramaturgy within a global perspective. And I wondered if either you or Reza wanted to have any final words to say.
Yeah, so let me first start with Reza. 2 یا 3 دقیقه وقت داریم حرفای آخرت.
از من یا از مقاله؟
از تو.
نخستین بررسی های شبیه‌خوانی توسط شرقشناسان غربی انجام شد.
The first research about shabih'khani were carried out by Orientalists.
ما از اونها یاد گرفتیم که گنجینه مهمی رو داریم که روشنفکرانمون روش بررسی چندانی نکردن.
We learned that from Western Orientalists how to focus on our own properties.
اما نکته این هست که شرقشناسان به دلیل اینکه ژرفای فرهنگ رو درست نمیشناختن، بسیاری از داده هایی که آوردن داده های سطحی از شبیه‌خوانی هست.
But because Orientalists didn't have enough knowledge about culture, Iranian culture, so most data were somehow superfluous.
هر نشانه تازه‌ای که از این گنجینه کهن یافت میشه میتونه راهنمای تازه‌ای باشه برای ما، برای اینکه به عمق این گنجینه پی ببریم.
Each newfound clue would help us to understand the depth of this culture.
همه تلاش من و دوستم میلاد این بود که بتونیم از در واقع پژوهش رو به معنای واقعی کلمه، به معنای جستجوی حقیقت به کار ببریم و از پژوهش‌های پیشین عبور بکنیم برای یافتن سرزمین‌های تازه.
Our research, Reza and me, was actually for finding new clues to cross the traditional boundaries and to enter to new worlds based on truths and scientific materials actually.
امروز کمابیش مطمئنیم که میتونیم به سرزمین‌های تازه‌ای در جهان شبیه‌خوانی دست پیدا بکنیم و اونا رو کشف بکنیم.
At the moment we are sure about we can enter to the new worlds again, more complicated, more in depth in shabih'khani.
امیدوارم که بتونیم این راه رو درست ادامه بدیم و فرهنگ ایرانی و برسازنده شبیه‌خوانی رو به جهانیان به درستی معرفی بکنیم.
We hope we can continue our studying and research to actually announce Iranian culture and particularly shabih'khani to the world in a proper way, in a correct way.
ما بر دوش همه جهانیان وایسادیم در این لحظه‌ای که داریم زندگی می‌کنیم.
Actually, we we supported by all people around the world at the moment. When we talk about our research, we rely on previous research actually.
و چه عالی میشه که بتونیم از تجربه همه اونا استفاده کنیم، نه حذف بخشی از اون تمدن.
And it would be great if we have chance to use all experience of all humankind, not just part of that. And it seems that we need to open our gates to the world.
و در پایان میخوام از چند نفر مخصوص تشکر بکنم.
I want to finally thank some specific persons.
نخست پروفسور شگنر.
You, Professor Schechner.
Thank you.
به این دلیل که این مطلب رو جدی گرفتن و همراهی و همدلی کردن تا به نتیجه رسید.
Because he believes in us and he actually support us to finish and complete this study.
It's a very important study, and I'm very, very, very pleased to have it and have it published in TDR. And I look forward to future studies, both from you and from your colleagues. I couldn't agree more that we need global collaboration and cooperation, and that we as scholars and artists have a big role to play in fostering that.
خیلی ممنونم از تو و این خیلی پژوهش بسیار ارزنده‌ایه و خیلی پیشرو و ما میتونیم که خیلی امیدواریم که به صورت جهانی عرضه بشه و باقی هم بتونن سرمشق بگیرن از این.
امیدوارم. دوم از پروفسور بیمن،
ویلیام بیمن،
نه فقط برای همراهی که با ما کرد و ما به واسطه اون مقاله رو بهشون تقدیم کردیم.
Not only for his cooperation for editing this article, but also
بلکه به عنوان یک پژوهشگر از نادر کسانی بود که از جوانی تا کنون همچنان فرهنگ ما رو پیگیری کرده و دست به کشف‌های مدام زده.
But also for his deep research and constant research about Iranian culture, and he actually broadens our horizons about our own culture.
و در پایان از ادیتورهای خیلی دقیق TDR که پوست ما رو کندن ولی کمک کردن که مقاله خیلی دقیق و خیلی درست منتشر بشه.
Finally, I really appreciate TDR's editor because of their devoted works. They somehow bother us, but it was great. So we can publish it in a completely proper manner.
و در پایان یک پیشنهادی دارم برای مخاطبان. خیلی برای ما جالب خواهد بود که دوستان مقاله نسخه دیجیتال مقاله رو که کاملتر عکس‌ها و جدول‌ها رو هم داره اون رو مبنا قرار بدن و مطالعه بکنن.
Sure, and finally a suggestion for audience. It is so great to just review the digital article because it is replete with full photos, full pictures, and also tables.
I want to thank Milad Azarm and Reza Kouchek-zadeh and Cambridge University Press for hosting this. I hope you can have further discussion, and indeed we are very pleased to have the article and very pleased to have this dialogue. I hope it is the harbinger of many to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.